Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to week 5 of PR3. And what I'm going to do now, so I hope you guys are all well, and I hope the formative assessment 1 is going well. What we're going to do now is we're going to just go through in terms of what we're going to cover this week, and we can take it from there. So in terms of week 5, if you look at it, South Africa faces many challenges, right? Now, in order to combat these challenges, there's a need for multi-stakeholder partnerships that are key to sustainable development. In the chapter, we'll discuss strategic communication in a broader society, in particular between government and civil society. So we also need to look at the need for participation between multi-stakeholder groups, the different meanings of power, and the role of stakeholder engagement in building social capital. We're going to cover for this week lessons 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, and page 30. So with regards to lesson 25, we're going to go through the understanding and the importance of relationships between government and civil society, which is covered through from page 88 up until 92. And then there's a class reflection. So with you not being, with us not being in class, that's something you're going to have to do as homework and then submit. There's 2 videos that I have with regards to that lesson. I will explain the lesson or the exercise for that matter on page 92, and then talk you through it, and then you can actually complete it and then return it. Secondly, stakeholder engagement in the context of government, civil society relationships, and building social capital through engagement. So there's also another reflection exercise on 98. There's some videos. Lesson 27 is building social capital through engagement. And another reflection exercise. Wow, this week is a lot of reflection exercise and a lot of homework. So you saw that we started gradually giving you exercises, case studies, activities to actually work on, because this week is full of them. In terms of lesson 28, the nature of government communication, and there's another reflection exercise on page 104. Lesson 29, you present feedback on activity on page 108, and students to work on activity 2 and prepare for feedback for next class. Students, in terms of lesson 30, students to present feedback on activity 2 on page 108. Now, here's the thing is that we're going to probably, if the lectures are not going to be recorded for the entire week, this week is exams for me as well. So hence the recording of the video. So tomorrow's videos are going to be recorded just purely on the fact that it's a public holiday. And today was, well, we didn't have classes today. So for tomorrow's lectures, definitely recorded because in lieu of the holiday. However, the work still needs to be done. So what I may do is I may actually ask you to prepare it and then present it online or whatever the case may be. So if you are meant to be on campus this week, make sure that if I am not on campus on Wednesday and Thursday, that you sign the attendance register with Jackie or Grace. If you can't find Jackie, go and get it signed through to Grace. But basically, in a nutshell, that is what this week is going to be all about. And I just want to flip screen so that we get into the presentation. Okay, so you should be seeing the slides at the moment. So we're going to talk about social capital engagement and the public sphere, right? And in terms of the understanding is to be able to develop an understanding of the public sphere, and the power enables students to develop effective stakeholder engagement, right? To understand the importance of relationship between government and civil society. Now, in South Africa, if you look, we have what we call the National Development Plan 2030. It's a framework that government has implemented in terms of identifying the challenges, the key challenges in South Africa, and how to actually overcome that. So very important to understand is that government has said that it's no longer just their responsibility. Okay, civil society actually needs to play a part into bridging those gaps, or where the challenges are, to actually look at them and how to assist. So what we're going to do is, as we're going to go through, there are two videos I will share with you. I just need to just make sure that the page is open so that when I need to flip screens, I'm able to do so fine. Let me do that quickly. Okay, that's fine. Let's get into it. So in terms of the social change and public sphere, um, as I mentioned in previous lectures, the roadmap for the week was available last week, Thursday or Friday. I can't remember which one. It was available, and it indicated that chapter 4 was critical in terms of reading, to be able to understand and have an understanding that when I'm presenting, that you can identify with the material. So for this lesson plan, it would have covered 87 pages, 87 through to all the way up until page 108. Okay, that is the entire chapter. So when you look at chapters like chapter 4, it's not very long. However, it's key in terms of understanding actually what is needed to be gained from that chapter. Apart from what we're going to take you through, we are merely here to provide a guideline. So there are some sections in the textbook we might not cover. The onus is on you to go and have a read through and make sure that you understand it. Like I've said before, with one of the chapters, where you find it has a complexity of terminology and you're not understanding, continue reading up until you completely understand it. Now, you're going to complete the reflection exercises, and there is more than one, I think, based on the activities. So that will probably be something that you would need to present online. So my thing is, please make sure you go through the chapter and you go through the work, excuse me, that needs to be done. Very, very important, right? Now what we're going to focus on is 88, pages 88 right up to pages 92 in terms of the content of the textbook. So yeah, please ensure that the lesson plans are covered and activities are done. What I will be doing is Nathan normally uploads them. I've only managed to gotten recording them now. So I will send a link on the group chat with the videos, which means that you can actually go through them tomorrow and work on them, and then be prepared for Wednesday and Thursday should we have live sessions. So when we look at South Africa, South Africa faces many challenges. And when we mean challenges, it's things like poverty, our ailing economy, corruption, scandals, the lack of progress in improving the lives of most of the people so many years after democracy. Democracy, it's over 20 years that we are in democracy. However, we are still plagued with an abundance of challenges. And, you know, there's other indicators or other tools that you can go or research that you can look at. So there's different industry bodies or organizations conduct, for example, the ease of doing business in South Africa. You can also look at a report that indicates the corruption levels in South Africa. And it will tell you how we are ranked when compared to other countries or around the world, or if you want to just look at the African continent, how South Africa is positioned. Okay, so this suggests a need to rethink the mode of engagement by different actors within society of the government to effectively serve its citizens. Multi-stakeholder partnerships are key to sustainable development. So what we're saying is, like I've mentioned not so long ago, is that apart from government, we have other organizations in civil society that can actually assist in terms of bridging that gap, closing that gap. And that is what we also speak about when we say nation building. We want us as a nation to succeed and to become a country where levels of corruption are low, where things like unemployment levels. So also if you do a comparison in terms of the unemployment levels in our country as opposed to African countries, and you'll see how high up we sit, because our unemployment levels is 30% plus at this point in time. And it's predominantly around the youth. So our problem in South Africa is the unemployment of the majority sits with the youth. The youth are the leaders of our future. So we have a huge problem in that area as well. Positive change is possible when an engagement among citizens, government, and the private sector take place. So if you look at a private sector, there are companies that are operating businesses and they are profitable. So that means they are financially sustainable. They are able to continue being profitable. And in terms of communities, if you look at, for example, communities, if private sector also plays a role in terms of some of the campaigns, activities, interventions into these communities, it can help make a difference. So this chapter will explore strategic communication in the context of a broader society. It'll examine the relationship between government and contemporary society. So the government and civil society relationships and governance. Government runs the state and its affairs. So in South Africa, we have a government. It consists of various ministries, and each of these ministries are responsible for example, if today was the proposed EFF shutdown, and that is when, in terms of security, the president implemented like the police and what I'm trying to find now, the army were deployed to ensure that there was law and order. So when you heard the president speak about the EFF shutdown, he mentions it very clearly in the Constitution of South Africa that people have a choice. It's their freedom, it's their right to be able to protest against things that they are unhappy about. However, the difference that he said is that it shouldn't stop, individuals shouldn't be stopped going to work. They shouldn't be stopped from going to work. There shouldn't be violence that ensues. People should not be losing their lives in the midst of these violence. So the government runs all of that, even in terms of home affairs, the infrastructure of the company, of the, sorry guys, it's the afternoon, that's why, hey. Even the country, the infrastructure in a country. So when you look at communities and you look at the infrastructure that we have in place and how it is lacking in communities, there are some communities where there's barely any clean drinking water. Remember, with cases like this where water, there's an issue around clean water, it brings about different kinds of diseases. And then that adds to the problem. The authority that sets the rules, so a government also refers to groups of people in charge. So we've spoken about the ministry, and in terms of each minister, right, being responsible for each of those ministries, that is how the government, in terms of the makeup of it, is. What you can do a step further is, if you don't know all of the ministries that we have in South Africa, please go and do some research to have an understanding how the constitution works, how the ministries work, and who does the government report to. So in every step of the way, if you look at, for example, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Finance will report into the cabinet and also government. So it's very important to understand the hierarchy in terms of how it works. The authority that sets rules for a society helps its members to relate to others and keep the process running smoothly, securely, and peacefully. In our country, that is what we want. We want processes to run smoothly, securely, and peacefully. The idea of governance assumes a fragmentation and diffusion of authority as a more relevant response to the complexity of economic and political decision-making in the contemporary world. Governance speaks to issues of ethics. It speaks to the way the government is run. It speaks to corruption, all of those issues. And all of them, just the few that I've named, apart from that, they add to the complexity of our economy and also political decision making. So in instances where there's political uncertainty. So if you look not so long back, is that when there was looting and rioting that happened mainly in KwaZulu-Natal, it also happened here in Johannesburg, where instances where actual businesses were being looted. They were being looted and destroyed, and that is political uncertainty. And that disrupts, it causes a huge disruption. It causes fractions of divisions with political bodies. So in the government, where there is, it's because certain political parties have done certain things, and it causes so much of fractions. And you see, with political parties, even the one thing you've got to remember is understand, why is a political party appointed? When you look at government and the number of seats a political party has, in terms of the votes and in terms of giving their input from their perspective, it's important to know what political parties we have in South Africa, the majority ones. So you have them in a specific order. ANC is the ruling party, and then you will have them in order of sort of the ones with the most votes in parliament and the ones to the least. Government Governance moves away from a purely top-down approach to governing and incorporates multi-level and multi-directional forms of engagement between different components within society. Now, if you look, you'll see there's page numbers at the top. So that is basically where the information is in terms of it. So I just want to read this on page 89. The health of a democracy depends on the communication flows between government and their citizen. So we're talking about the health of democracy, the health of our country, right? The engagement of a government with other stakeholders collectively is referred to as civil society. Is considered the best way of improving governance, building social capital, facilitating systems infused with productive power. Civil society is the network of non-state organizations, its individuals, its social movements that represent various interests. While there are many differences of opinions on issues among different entities, civil society organizations tend to interact with each other to seek solutions and agreement on matters of concern. So if you look back through at COVID-19, when the country was in absolute chaos, right? What happened then is that civil society also became involved in terms of working towards a common goal. So the Solidarity Fund was established by the government. However, there were organizations and high net worth individuals, even people who could contribute, say, 2,000 Rand to the Solidarity Fund. So that is government partnering with civil society for the greater good of all. Because a lot of people, in terms of the economy, when you look at COVID-19 and what it did, we needed to pull together as a nation in order to get through it. Luckily, we have. Unfortunately, many people did lose their jobs, but recently when I heard about the unemployment levels has slightly decreased. Slightly, but there is some improvement on it. So there is hope. So the health of a democracy depends on the communication flows between government and their citizens. The engagement of a government with other stakeholders collectively referred to as civil society is considered the best way of improving governance, building social capital, and facilitating systems infused with productive power, which is something that I read to you now. So when you look at things like the King Report, so Professor Mervyn King, if you don't know what the King Report is, go and read up, even if it's a summarized version on the net, use a credible source. There's different versions of it. So it was King 1, King 2, King 3, and each version of the report improved. And what happened then is that this is where civil society takes things a little bit differently, is that if a company is they are on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, they have got to ensure that they meet the guidelines of the King 4 report. Now, this report is not mandatory. However, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange says if you don't meet the criteria of the report, you'll be fined, you'll receive a hefty fine, which you have to pay. And what this report speaks to is things like issues on governance, corruption, social capital. It talks about the environment. It talks about gender disparity. So both you and Nipo and Mbali, you've done your social issues exercises, and it was around gender disparity and gender in sort of the imbalance that there is in society. So it's very important to be able to read up different documents, different pieces of legislation that is introduced into the country so that you have a greater understanding as to how this fits in. The issue of building relationships, the issue of governance. One of the biggest things in our country is corruption. Okay, so if you look at ESCOM, ESCOM is another example of a state-owned entity that is trying to, government is working together with like the ministry to be able to turn things around. It didn't help in the middle of or the midst of everything that the CEO resigned, and even at one stage, the deputy president, he then stepped down. So there's a number of issues, and you also need to ask yourself why and go into the reasoning. So if you've heard that the deputy president stepped down, right? What was the reasons behind it? And read credible news sources. Civil society partners include non-government organizations. So these are your organizations, not non-profit organizations. So if you looked at Gift of the Givers, it's a non-profit or a non-government organization. Social cause groups, societal institutions, media, business organizations, government and international organizations. So there is a table that is on page 89 that I'm going to refer to you. So there's a huge number of stakeholder groups that we have, right? The citizens of society or our country. There's some citizens who have the power, the influence, the financial stability or they're high wealth individuals who are able to then look at social causes, okay, look at issues in communities, and then they are able to assist. So if you look like, and remember when I use examples, it's not because I am affiliated or I absolutely believe in individuals and what they believe in. It's merely for illustration purposes. If you look at like Patrice Motsepe, one of the richest men in South Africa, and in terms of what he does to give back to communities, it's across the board. They're high net worth individuals who actually contribute and they fall part. And when we say citizens, so when we had the Solidarity Fund during COVID-19, this did not only speak to people who had wealth, high net individuals. Like I said, there were people that were pledging 2,000 Rand. There were even people who pledged 100 Rand into Solidarity Fund. Will that 100 Rand have made a difference in some aspect? Yes. At the time, during COVID-19, it really worked. There were companies in some instances where the leadership came to the forefront and they said for a certain number of months, they're going to take 20% of their salary and they are going to donate it into the Solidarity Fund. Because they have jobs, they're needed, the company is still profitable, they decided to actually give back to society as an individual and as a collective. So when there are, like, if you look at Mozambique, so our neighboring African countries, when there are situations, so when for example, when the looting and all of that was happening, the social unrest that happened in KwaZulu-Natal, Adcock Ingram, which is a company that I previously worked for, their major shareholder is Bidvest. So Bidvest, remember, they have specific vehicles and modes of transport to transport money and things like that. what they did is they actually managed to assist in terms of getting food parcels, medical supplies to those communities. So there was a big demand for medical supplies. So as a company, that is what they did in terms of saying it's not just government, we all need to um, actually get involved in terms of contributing. If you cannot, as an individual, because we're all part of civil society, right? If you cannot contribute financially, there's other ways that you can contribute, and that is giving of your time. So if you go through to a children's home and you spend time with children, or if you go to an old age home and spend time with the elderly, that is giving of your time. So that means you fall part of civil society. So a lot of people think there's nothing much I can do because I don't have that financial um, backing or loads of money lying around that I can contribute. You can contribute to society in different ways. Okay. Also, you could go to a community where there is, or speak to a women's group, women who have been abused and who have experienced different levels of violence against them, even emotional abuse. So when you look at 16 days of activism against women and children, it is not just physical abuse that a woman can experience. It's emotional abuse, financial abuse, where if the woman isn't working or in a career and she's at home and looking after the kids in the home, where money is being withheld and she does not have any money to be able to do anything, even if she just wants to go to the shop, she's not able to do so. So society is connected through discourses that are represented in a communicative process. So based on information, communication, and relationships. Engagement efforts with civil society are described as participatory governance. So we're looking at the stakeholder groups, which is on page 89. There are citizens, right? Individuals that within a particular society. We also look at media. So media play an integral part in society. Media outlets such as newspapers, radio, TV stations, social media, um, also dissemination of public interest, right? Provide a connection between different institutions and organizations and the publics, and hold organizations and governments accountable for their action. So there are groups in South Africa, so you call them activists, where they stand up for a social cause. You get some activists that protest around, for example, the pollution in the environment, pollution in the ocean. There was a huge uproar, and I'm not sure if I've mentioned this example before. So BP is a massive company. And many, many years ago, there was an oil spill. And this oil spill covered 18,000 kilometers. Listen to what I'm saying, 18,000 kilometers. So if you happen to look at, just say if you drive from Gauteng to KwaZulu-Natal, it's about 700 kilometers. This is 18,000 kilometers. And what had happened is there were activists and people who had that cause was very close to their heart, took a stance, because what had happened with the oil spill, no sunlight was getting through. It was killing the marine life, and it was a huge issue. But back to the point in terms of, and this speaks to public relations, the CEO at the time said he wanted his life back, meaning that he didn't really want to deal with the crisis, which is quite interesting in terms of a response. So non-government organizational is social enterprises, charities, activist group that work on behalf of issues. So you get activists who speak to the environment, who focus on the environment, gender-based violence groups. There are so many groups, and go and read up on the different social causes. And you covered it in, in Bali and Nipo in your two presentations that you did, social causes, right? And you put together that presentation. So it is very important to understand that different charities, if you look at the Gift of Givers, Gift of the Givers is a non-profit organization and non-government organization. A non-profit organization operates from a stance that they are not operating in the environment purely for profit. They are operating, yes, they need to be financially sustainable to be able to run through with the operations of the organization, to be able to pay the expenses, but bigger than that is to make a contribution to society in specific causes. So you have, for example, a charity that runs a women and children's shelter. They will need funding to be able to do that. So the Gift of the Givers is generally, you will find in the news, it's the one that comes top of mind. Imtiaz Suleiman, if you go and look at why he actually went into doing what he was doing, is he's a very educated man. So if you ever have a chance in your spare time, go and read up a little bit on his background. Is that he was educated, he wanted to do more for communities, and one day when he had a conversation with his prophet, so his mentor, if you can call it, and he said, your calling is bigger than this. So then that is when the Gift of Givers was a movement that started. And today, whenever there is some sort of crisis due to whether it's a natural disaster, the KwaZulu-Natal, the looting and the civil unrest, what happens is you will find Gift of the Givers making, they get their resources together and they provide to those communities. Now, what happens is individuals who have the resources in terms of financial or whatever the case, they are then able to provide organizations that are not for profit, excuse me, and to be able to manage those resources. So where there's food parcels that are needed, they would then be able to have the funding to put food parcels together and to be able to support those communities. Read up on some of the charitable organizations in South Africa. It's not only, as I've mentioned, like when there is like a crisis where there's a food shortage due to looting or homeless people, when there is natural disasters like flooding and people's homes and all their belongings are destroyed. It goes further than that. There are so many. I would suggest go up and read up on it, right? International organizations. So supranational organizations, not supernatural, supranatural, national organizations. So example, the European Union. Now, I'm going to mention there. So I've mentioned the European Union and international and intergovernmental organizations. For example, the World Trade Organization, the Southern African Development Community, which is called SADC, and the World Bank. Now, bodies like the European Union, the World Bank, SADC, all of those institutions provide funding to South Africa for different reasons. It's in line with the development of society, the upliftment, etc. So please go and research, read up on what the European Union does, the SADC does, or the World Trade Bank. All of why were they created and what do they do? So different countries build relationships with different partners. So, like I mentioned, in one of our lessons, the president of Uganda came to visit South Africa. He met with the president and he had a discussion with him. So you need to understand, why was the president of Uganda actually visiting to meet with the president. It's also about building relationships beyond than just coming through because there's an issue in society or issues in a certain country. In terms of business, so business organizations have a voice in civil society through their influence on government and legislation, but also through corporate citizenship activities and their actions that can benefit or harm the society within which they function. So if you look at a company that has a manufacturing facility and they are within a community, so you look at Clayville or Olifantsfontein, where it's a lot of industrial companies. A lot of these companies actually manufacture products. What happens is the carbon emissions that are emitted from these facilities is quite high. What that does is it damages the environment. It's a danger to people, because if you breathe in these carbon emissions, it's going to affect your lungs. So there are companies who are, in terms of also the King report to tie it in, where companies need to look at communities and how they can actually assist. So when you look at triple BEE, and if you need to get a broader understanding in terms of that terminology, go and read up on it. What it says as part of the scorecard. So companies get what we call a rating. They are rated by a rating agency in terms of a level 1 triple BEE company, level 2, 3, 4. So the lower you go in terms of that scale, the better you are positioned in a better light. So when you're on level 1, is that you are doing all the things that are needed to do in terms of contributing to society. So, for example, a lot of companies, they invest 1% of their annual turnover. I'm not sure, 100% sure whether it's before profit. Before profit, and so it's 1% of their net turnover after taxes. So which means after the taxes or it's before. I'm not 100%, maybe mistaken there. So they will take 1%. So if a company goes and they are profitable and they make so many billion or millions of rand, 1% of it has got to be allocated towards corporate social responsibility activities. So it is very important to actually understand the terminology, because that is how it ties into everything else. So level 1 is actually quite good, and part of being level 1, and there's different elements to the scorecard, is whether a company supports Black women-owned businesses, right? So you must have heard of the term in society we call socio-economic development. It's also helping Black businesses to remain financially sustainable. So there are companies that actually mentor specific smaller emerging companies, not only with resources, like financial resources. It's also in terms of things like they may run a workshop or give them training as to how to run a business effectively. Because in order to run a business, there are a number of things you have to take into consideration when you're starting up a business. When you are a bigger business, you have 20, 30, 40, 50 people in your team. You will have a financial director, someone who looks at the financial aspects of the company, right? In cases where you are a one man or one woman show, and you've started up your business, you need to have an understanding of finances. You need to understand legislation and specifically to your business, right? There's so many aspects of it. And in terms of getting your business up and running, one of the things you need to do is actually ensure before your company can get registered, or when it needs to get registered, you need a bank account that is in the company's name, not on your individual name, if it's a registered company, right? So very important to look at things like that. So governance, the process and system of governing, including the political system, people and institutions that are responsible for governing a country. It involves local, provincial, national structures for the state government and administration associated with the bureaucracy of the state. So we have different processes in place and different ministries that apply different approaches. And when something goes into law, it's gazetted and it becomes legislation. So when you look at the POPI Act, the Protection of Personal Information Act, which is one of your case studies for your formative assessment, which was implemented in July 2021, it was legislated. And when it's legislated, it becomes part of the legislation and the regulation of the country, and people need to abide by it. So that is how things are done. And remember, when policies become legislated, it's a very long process. It's just not overnight. So go back, read on page 89 in terms of those stakeholders, and you can continue from there just to get a better understanding. Also go and have a look at what other additional organizations form part of civil society. So you get industry bodies. For example, in South Africa, you get a body that speaks to it's different pharmaceutical and healthcare companies that come together, right? So it's the pharmaceutical task group. They come together, and even though they are competitors as businesses, so if you look at your Aspens of the world, your AstraZeneca, Adcock Ingram, all of these companies are competitors because they're wanting a bigger share of market share in the country, or those companies that are global, like Aspen, AstraZeneca, they want to create market presence and increase that market share. What these companies do for a common purpose, they get together from different companies, competing companies. They put their sort of competing differences aside, and they discuss things that are relevant and affect the pharmaceutical environment. I've just used that as an example because it's one of the company, my previous company, it was pharmaceutical. So you have industry related bodies that also they try and make an impact. So as a collective, what this industry body does is they would then approach a specific sector within government, like the Ministry of Health, and they would debate on the price increases, because with price increases on medication, that is legislated by law. So where you get medication that's not prescription related, so like if you go to a shelf and you pick up a Gaviscon for heartburn, that is not mandated by law. But the moment a product is a prescription medication where you've got to get a script in order to get that medication from a pharmacy, right? Those medications all, each year, it's round about February, March, that the government, the Minister of Health, will declare what is going to be the increases for medication that are regulated. So very important to understand. So what happens is when the increase is minimal, these companies would get together and approach government to negotiate. And sometimes it happens where government, through the negotiations process, that there is change brought about in terms of the pricing model. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to stop sharing and I am going to play a video for you. I just need to find this video very quickly. Okay, I'm doing it the wrong way again.
The public sphere is an area in social life.
Okay, got the video, found the video. Let me share it now. There we go. Just going to rewind that. And I'm going to play for you this video. So this is talking about cultural studies terms in the public sphere.
The public sphere is an area in social life where individuals can come together to freely discuss social problems and form public opinions. Public opinions thus formed would ideally influence and control the authority of the state in a democratic manner. The formation of the public sphere and public opinions dates back to the 18th century with the rise of the middle class, when the world public began to develop the common citizens. Before this time, the realm of public authority denoted the ruling classes, the police, and the state, as against the private sphere or the realm of trade, commerce, and the working classes. A public sphere in the modern sense emerged from within the private sphere in the world of literary activities in connection with periodicals like newspapers and the clubs and coffee houses where the periodicals were in circulation. In this new sense, the public sphere of public opinions were seen as a regulatory institution against the state authority. Even in later times, the media has continued to play a significant role in public sphere theory. And as important as the media in public sphere are the politicians. The first attempt to classify public opinion in this manner was done by Jürgen Habermas, who wrote the book, The Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere, an inquiry into a category of bourgeois society in German language in 1962. Here, Habermas studied the emergence of the middle class in Britain, France, and Germany in the 18th century and coined the term public sphere and defined it as a virtual or imaginary community that does not necessarily exist in any identifiable space. Habermas asserted that the power that the public gained in the 18th century has returned to the private sector in modern consumerist societies, where the public has been turned into unthinking masses. Theorist Gerard Hauser pointed out that public sphere has a rhetorical nature, being centered on the ongoing debates on public issues, rather than the identity of the individuals and groups engaged in this debate. Theories of the public sphere are now being applied to internet technologies and the social media, as in YouTube or Facebook. However, critics have objected to the entertainment value, consumerism, and sensationalism of these platforms. Critics have also pointed out that the concept of universal public sphere involves a hegemonic power and the exclusion of marginalized groups. I hope you enjoyed this video on the term public sphere.
Okay, so we watched that video in terms of, I just want to close it. I want to share, go back to my presentation. Okay, so it's a video in terms of cultural study terms and the evolution of how it has changed. So if you look just in general, as customers, consumers, when social media emerged, okay, people became very vocal on specific issues. They become less tolerant when it comes to corruption. If you looked at ESCOM and what was trending in terms of what the general public were saying, is that people are now more vocal in terms of their opinions, in terms of fighting for causes, and the world has changed. Remember, we've said we live in an ever-changing environment. This is exactly what we're speaking about. So the role of public sphere in a democracy. So South Africa is a democracy. It's 20 years on now. So the public sphere is a domain of social life where public opinion can be formed. When you also looked at in terms of when the president spoke, right? The reason that the EFF protests, one of the things that they were protesting about was issues of corruption, unemployment, etc. But most of all, they wanted President Ramaphosa to step down. And the president, in turn, responded when he spoke to say that it's the only time that he will step down or, you know, get off that seat is that if he's voted, but it's a vote by the people. Remember, in a democracy, we have individuals as a right to vote, right, for who we want in power. So it's very important to look at things like that. So when you look at television, newspapers, joint communities involving government and private sector organizations, public participation forums, and even parliamentary sessions, right? If you look at parliamentary sessions and the State of the Nation address, so when it was COVID-19, the State of the Nation address was done virtually. What happened in this year's State of the Nation address? We had political party interference in terms of voicing their opinions of certain things that they were not happy with. It is a multi-dimensional symbolic space that connects the interests of citizens with the interests of government. It's concerned with multiple matters and evolves with societal change. So remember when we looked at the, I think it was in Bali's presentation, the evolution of women. Women were not allowed to vote at one stage in life. Now, through evolution, and today women can vote, women can have careers, they can go through and study and educate themselves. So remember, societal change, it's inevitable. Okay, it's not a constant. Through communication in the public sphere, public opinion is generated as a political and social force. Government, as well as different elements of civil society, are the building blocks of the public sphere. So what I am going to do is I'm going to pause this recording on the slide, and I'm going to continue. I'll probably do the recording quite early tomorrow morning so that you have the links before the time that class was scheduled for, and we can take it from there. It's been a very long day. I've done a lot of recordings for PR2. It's because PR2 classes were held in the morning, so I had to do the classes for that. And so I'm going to stop here. I'm going to stop the recording here, and then I will continue. So this is going to be part A. Follow through on YouTube, and the links, it will say part A, part B, part C, and so forth. So I am going to stop recording now, and I will continue with a further session tomorrow morning, bright and early.